Point of View Part 2, Video and Worksheet. In the last video, Part 1, we learned about the three main points of view, first person, second person, and third person. In this video, Part 2, we're going to learn about the three types of third person point of view. They are called third person objective, third person limited, which is also called third person subjective, and third person omniscient. Let's quickly review what is point of view. Point of view is the perspective or eyes a story is told from. We have the narrator, and everything in blue is the narrator's point of view. I'm going to very quickly review the three main types of point of view from video 1. A narrator using first person point of view will use first person pronouns I, my, we, our, me, and us. This narrator will speak a lot about himself or herself. This narrator is also usually the main character of a story. A narrator using second person point of view will use a lot of second person pronouns like you and your. This narrator will be speaking directly to the reader. This point of view is rarely used. Finally, a narrator using third person point of view will use a lot of third person pronouns like he, she, it, they, his, her, and their. Most stories use this point of view. There are three types of third person point of view that you are about to learn. So here we have three narrators, and all three are third person point of view. But each is a different type of third person point of view. Let's read their words and see if you can tell how their words are different. Each narrator is telling a story. The story is about a boy and something the boy did. So the first narrator says, he looked sad. He seemed nervous. He said he didn't want to tell his mom that he broke the window. When he finally told her, she seemed calm. The second narrator says, he was sad. He felt nervous. He didn't want to tell his mom that he broke the window. But when he finally told her, she seemed calm. And the third narrator says, he was sad. He felt nervous. He didn't want to tell his mom that he broke the window. When he finally told her, she felt calm. There are small differences in the words of each narrator. Can you see what they are? Let's compare the first two narrators. How are these two narrators different? The first narrator says about the boy that he looked sad. He seemed nervous. He said he didn't want to tell his mom that he broke the window. But the second narrator says he was sad. He felt nervous. He didn't want to tell his mom that he broke the window. Can you tell how the narrators are different? I'll give you a hint. One of the narrators knows more than the other one. Which narrator knows more? The answer is that the second narrator knows more. Here's why. Narrator 1 doesn't know the boy's thoughts, but narrator 2 knows the boy's thoughts. How can we be sure that this is true? Because a few words by each of the narrators prove it's true. Let's look. The first narrator says the boy looked sad. The second narrator says the boy was sad. Do you see the difference? When do we say someone looked sad? Think about yourself. If you said the words, he looked sad, about a boy, does that mean that you know the boy's sad, or does that mean you think the boy is sad? That means you think he's sad. What about he was sad? When would you say that? You would say that when you know for sure that the boy feels sad. This is how we know that narrator 2 is the one who knows more. Narrator 2 is the one who knows how the boy feels. What about the third narrator? How is this narrator different from the others? First, does the third narrator know how the boy feels? He says about the boy, he was sad. He felt nervous. He didn't want to tell his mom that he broke the window. Yes, the third narrator knows how the boy feels, not just how the boy seems to feel. Now, let's look at the character of the mom. Which narrators know how the mom feels and what she thinks? The first narrator and the second narrator say that when the boy finally told her about the window, she seemed calm. Do the first and second narrators know how the mom feels? No, they don't. They know how she seems to feel. How about the third narrator? The third narrator says, when the boy finally told his mom about the window, she felt calm. The third narrator knows how the mom feels. So that's how this narrator is different. This narrator knows the boy's and the mom's thoughts. Let's write the information that we just discussed. So the first narrator, does this narrator know the boy's thoughts?
No, he doesn't.
What about the mom's thoughts?
No, he doesn't know her thoughts either.
Look at the second narrator. Does this narrator know the boy's thoughts? Yes. And what about the mom's thoughts? No, this narrator does not know the mom's thoughts. And what about the third narrator? Does this narrator know the boy's thoughts? Yes. And what about the mom's thoughts? Yes, this narrator also knows the mom's thoughts.
So our first narrator doesn't know the thoughts of the boy or the mom. This narrator uses third-person objective point of view. In third-person objective point of view, the narrator knows no character's thoughts. The second narrator knows the thoughts of the boy, but not of the mom. This narrator uses third-person limited point of view. In this point of view, the narrator knows one character's thoughts, but no one else's. Third-person limited points of view is sometimes called third-person subjective. Finally, our third narrator knows the thoughts of all characters, in this case both the boy and the mom. This is called third-person omniscient point of view. In this point of view, the narrator knows all characters' thoughts and opinions. Let's put this information into the table. So remember that all third-person point of view narrators use pronouns like he, she, it, they, his, her, and their. Third-person objective point of view involves a narrator who knows no character's thoughts. For example, he looked sad, he seemed nervous. This narrator sees the boy, but he doesn't know how the boy feels or what he's thinking. In third-person limited point of view, also called third-person subjective point of view, the narrator knows one character's thoughts, but not the thoughts of other characters. For example, he felt sad, he was nervous, but his mother seemed calm. In this example, the narrator speaking knows the thoughts of the boy, but not the thoughts of the mom. Finally, there's third-person omniscient point of view. In this point of view, the narrator knows all characters' thoughts, feelings, and opinions. For example, he was sad, he felt nervous, but his mother was calm. This narrator knows the thoughts of the boy and the thoughts of the mom. Those are both characters in the story, so this narrator is using third-person omniscient point of view.
Now let's practice identifying third-person objective, limited, and omniscient point of view. Practice number 1 from Harry Potter, Chapter 1 by J.K. Rowling. Harry Potter was a wizard fresh from his first year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and if the Dursleys were unhappy to have him back for the holidays, it was nothing to how Harry felt. He missed Hogwarts so much that it was like having a constant stomachache. Question 1. What is the point of view? Question 2. How do you know that? Go ahead and record your answers, and we'll check them in a moment. Pause the video while you work. Practice number 2. From Magic Treehouse number 37, Dragon of the Red Dawn, by Mary Pope Osborne. Great, said Jack. He hoped they would be safer away from the heart of Ado. Then maybe they could focus on their search for the secret. Jack, Annie, and Basho joined the crows crossing the bridge. What's that mountain? Said Annie. She pointed to a snow-capped mountain looming in the distance. Question 1. What is the point of view? Question 2. How do you know that? Write your answers and pause the video while you work. Practice number 3. From Hoot, Chapter 2 by Carl Hyacin. Of all the places the Everharts had lived, Roy's favorite was Bozeman, Montana. Roy had never imagined anywhere so beautiful. Roy wanted to stay forever. His mother assured Roy that he would love Florida. Everybody in America wants to move there, she'd said. Then, Roy's father had poked his head in the door and said, with somewhat forced enthusiasm, "And don't forget Disney World." Question 1. What is the point of view? Question 2. How do you know that? Practice number 4. From the story Two Bad Ants, Chapter 1, by Chris Van Allsburg. A scout had returned with a remarkable discovery, a beautiful sparkling crystal. When the scout presented the crystal to the ant queen, she took a small bite, then quickly ate the entire thing. She deemed it the most delicious food she'd ever tasted. Nothing could make her happier than to have much, much more. The ants understood. They were eager to gather more crystals. Question 1. What is the point of view? Question 2. How do you know that? Pause the video as you write your answers, and then we'll check the answers to all 4 questions next. Are you ready to check your answers? Practice 1 from the story Harry Potter. Question 1. What is the point of view? The answer is third person omniscient. Question 2. How do you know that? First, how do we know that the point of view is third person rather than second or first person? We know it's third person point of view because of the pronouns. This narrator uses third person pronouns his, him, and he. Now, if the narrator were using first person pronouns like I, my, we, and our, we'd know that was first person point of view. Or second person pronouns like you and your, that would be second person point of view. But this one is using third person pronouns. Another reason that we know it's third person is because this narrator is watching the story, but not in the story with the characters. If the narrator were in the action of the story with characters, this narrator would be talking to the characters and doing other things with the characters. But this narrator isn't doing that. This narrator is watching the characters from a distance, watching their actions and their thoughts, and then telling readers about that information. That means that this narrator is using third person point of view. That's why it's third person, but how do we know it's third person omniscient rather than third person limited or third person objective? We know it's omniscient because this narrator knows the thoughts of all characters in the story. Let's look at this selection. Here we have the character of Harry Potter, and we have a family with the last name of Dursley. This sentence shows us that the narrator knows what the Dursleys are silently thinking. It says, "And if the Dursleys were unhappy to have him back for the holidays, it was nothing to how Harry felt." Did the Dursleys say that they were unhappy Harry was going to visit them? No. This was a silent thought they had, and the narrator knows this thought. The narrator knows what the Dursleys think. And what about Harry? He missed Hogwarts so much that it was like having a constant stomach ache. Did Harry say these words out loud to someone? No, he didn't. This was a silent thought that Harry had in his mind, and the narrator knew this thought. So, if the narrator knows Harry's thoughts and the Dursleys' thoughts, that means it's third person omniscient. Practice 2. Question 1. What is the point of view? The answer is third person limited. Question 2. How do you know that? Well, first, this narrator uses third person pronouns he, they, and she. Another reason that we know this is a third person point of view is because this narrator is watching the story, but not in the story with the characters. And finally, how do we know that it's third person limited versus third person omniscient or objective? We know that because this narrator knows the thoughts of one character, the character Jack. How do we know that? The first sentences tell us. Let's reread them. "Great," said Jack. He hoped they would be safer away from the heart of Ado. Then, maybe they could focus on their search for the secret. Here, we see silent thoughts and feelings that Jack is having. One of them is that Jack hopes his group will be safer when they leave this place called Ado. Another silent thought Jack is having is that maybe his group can then focus on the search for the secret. Did Jack say those words out loud? Did he tell someone else about this? No, those thoughts were totally silent, but the narrator knew them. That shows us that the narrator knows what Jack is thinking. Now, what about the other characters, Annie and Basho? Jack, Annie, and Basho joined the crows crossing the bridge. Do we see any silent thoughts here that the narrator is telling us about? No, we don't. We just see here that the characters are crossing the bridge. And what about the last sentences about Annie? "What's that mountain?" said Annie. She pointed to a snow-capped mountain looming in the distance. Are we seeing any silent thoughts or feelings that Annie is having here? No, we're not. We're just seeing words that she says, and we also see her action, where she's pointing to a mountain in the distance. So there's nothing silent that Annie is thinking that the narrator knows about. This means that the narrator doesn't know Annie's thoughts or Basho's thoughts, but the narrator does know Jack's thoughts. That's why this narrator is using third-person limited point of view. Practice number 3 from the story Hoot. Question 1. What is the point of view? The answer is third-person limited. Question 2. How do you know that? Well, first, how do we know it's third person versus second person or first person? We know it's third person because of the pronouns. This narrator uses third-person pronouns his, he, and she. Remember, if there were a lot of first-person pronouns like I, my, our, and we, that would mean first-person point of view. If there were a lot of second-person pronouns like you and your, that would mean second-person point of view. But this narrator uses third-person pronouns, so we know it's a third-person point of view. Also, we know that this is third-person point of view because this narrator is watching the story, but not in the story with the characters. This narrator is a little distant from the story and telling us about it. So that's a third-person point of view. Finally, how do we know it's third-person limited point of view versus omniscient or objective? We know this is third-person limited because the narrator knows the thoughts of one character. Which character? There are 3 characters that this narrator tells us about: Roy Eberhardt, his mother, and his father. But the narrator only knows the thoughts and feelings of Roy. How do we know that? In these sentences, the narrator tells us that of all the places the Eberhardts had lived, Roy's favorite was Bozeman, Montana. Roy had never imagined anywhere so beautiful. Roy wanted to stay forever. Are these thoughts and feelings things that Roy said aloud, or were they silent? These were silent thoughts, but the narrator still knew about them. That proves to us that the narrator knows what Roy thinks and feels. Now, what about the mother? The narrator tells us his mother assured Roy that he would love Florida. Everybody in America wants to move there, she'd said. Do we see any silent thoughts and feelings of the mom? No. We just see things that she did and said. The narrator does not know any silent thoughts or feelings of the mother. And what about the father? Then, Roy's father had poked his head in the door and said, with somewhat forced enthusiasm, "And don't forget Disney World." Do we see any silent thoughts or feelings that the father has? No, we don't. We just see something that the father did and said. This narrator does not know the internal thoughts and feelings of the dad or the mom, but the narrator does know the internal thoughts and feelings of Roy. That's how we know that this narrator is using third-person limited point of view, because this narrator knows the thoughts and feelings of one person. Practice 4 from the story Two Bad Ants. Question 1. What is the point of view? The answer is third-person omniscient. Question 2. How do you know that? Well, we know that the narrator is using third-person point of view versus second-person or first-person because of the pronouns. This narrator uses third-person pronouns she, her, and they. We also know that this is a third-person point of view because the narrator is watching the story, but not in the story. But how do we know that the third-person narrator is omniscient rather than limited or objective? We know that because this narrator knows the thoughts of all characters in the story. The characters in this story are the queen ant and all the other ants. This narrator knows all of their thoughts. Here are the sentences that show us that the narrator knows the thoughts of the queen ant. One ant had given the queen a sparkling crystal, and the narrator tells us, nothing could make her happier than to have much, much more. Did the queen ant say this out loud? No. These were silent thoughts and feelings that the queen had, and the narrator knows about them. This means the narrator knows the queen's thoughts and feelings. The other ants understood. They were eager to gather more crystals. Did the ants say this? They did not. The narrator simply knows that this is what the ants were thinking. That's how we know that the narrator knows the thoughts of those ants. So, because the narrator knows the thoughts of all these characters, the point of view is third person omniscient. Point of view part 2, the end. Our lesson on types of third person point of view is complete. I hope this video helped you understand third person points of view and how to identify each one. Thank you for watching.